It's 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started now. Hello and welcome to tonight's event, A Truly Safe Space, Cultural Literacy and First Amendment Muscle. My name is Lisa Hoffman, and I'm the co-chair of the Diverse and Underserved Populations Committee from Buckles, where we put together this event with several other people who you'll be introduced to. We're happy to have you all here tonight. For starters, I'd like to welcome Dave Hansen, Executive Director of Buckles, to say a few things.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for participating in a vital night of information and learning. We're very excited to be bringing this to you. This has been a long time in coming. We have thanks to previous President Stephanie Bellucci, who worked with the LGBTQ Advisory Committee of Bergen County to get this ball rolling. And thanks to Adele Puccio, our current president, who picked it up and kept it going because it's really necessary right now. We thank our DUP committee, our Diversified and Underserved Population Committee, for really being the group that solidified what you're going to see here tonight and was the ground that we bring this to. And I'm just going to leave you with this final thought. You know, more than ever today, I just want to remind everybody that one of our values as public libraries is that libraries are for everybody. Just period. I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves that it takes effort and it takes work and it takes understanding for us to really achieve that very vital part of what it means to be a public library. So thanks again for being here. Thanks to all the speakers you're going to hear tonight, but thanks to all the people who made this possible.
Thank you, Dave. Now Adele Puccio, current president of Buckles, will also say a few words.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I think that this is an extremely worthwhile program. I commend our Diverse and Underserved Populations Committee for putting this together. It is so vital that in this time when we're facing so many challenges that we learn how to deal with them, but also learn how to get along together. So sit back, relax, enjoy, and get those questions ready. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Adele. Next up, Commissioner Tracy Zur, a lifelong Bergen County resident who holds a BA from the University of Texas, a law degree from Fordham University, and a master's in public administration from Rutgers, will be speaking. During her last 9 years as a commissioner in Bergen County, Tracy has led the push to expand Project Search, a program that helps young adults with disabilities to be successful in the workplace. She spearheaded the creation of Bergen County's first LGBTQ advisory committee and holds Bergen County's annual LGBTQ Youth Summit for high school students. Most recently, she formed the Bergen County Food Security Task Force to address rising levels of hunger due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to becoming a commissioner, Tracy served as a municipal prosecutor in Hoboken, a judge in Bergen County Central Municipal Court, and the public defender to both Englewood and Woodcliff Lake, handling municipal issues as well as criminal defense work. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you everyone for being part of this conversation tonight. I think you as librarians know firsthand that knowledge is power. I grew up listening to that on my Saturday morning cartoons, for those of you who are of my generation. But you know how important it is to truly be equipped with the tools to not only stimulate learning and engage our community, but to, as Dave said, serve everyone, and to make sure that our libraries are a safe space, to make sure that you have the information to really fight against some of the challenges that we're seeing, to freedom of expression, to making sure that all voices are embraced. And so thank you to Buckles for really being such a tremendous partner to the LGBTQ Advisory Committee. And we're in for a treat tonight because Deb Guston has a wealth of information to share. And I hope that this empowers future ongoing collaboration so that we can continue to really partner to make sure that the diverse voices in our county are heard, embraced, and all are welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Our first presenter will be Debra E. Guston, Esquire, partner in the law firm of Guston & Guston, LLP in Glen Rock, New Jersey. She's a part-time lecturer at Rutgers School of Law. Deb has been honored by the National LGBTQ+ Bar Association with its Leading Practitioner Award, which recognizes lawyers in solo and small legal practices for their impact on LGBTQ+ legal issues. Deb frequently provides LGBTQ+ cultural competency programs for professionals, civic groups, and municipalities. Our second speaker, who graciously stepped in when our original speaker, Frank Corrado, had an emergency come up. Jean Lo Cicero is the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey. She supervises the litigation program and related advocacy of the ACLU-NJ's legal department and manages its 10+ person staff. Jean joined the ACLU-NJ as a staff attorney in 2004 and served as its deputy legal director for 10 years prior to becoming legal director in 2018. She has litigated and advocated in a wide range of civil rights and civil liberties cases with a focus on prison conditions, racial equity, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, and reproductive health. She recently served on New Jersey's Transgender Equality Task Force, is a trustee of the Association of the Federal Bar of New Jersey, and serves on other legal and policy committees. Jean started her legal career as a legal fellow at ACLU of Alabama after graduating with highest honors. Thank you to both of our speakers for joining us tonight. Deb, take it away.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me, and also want to welcome a few of our members of our LGBTQ advisory committee who are with us tonight as well. So this is a little about me. It's in your materials, but the reason why I'm not particularly a self-promoter, but the reason why I put all this stuff up there is the one thing I want to confess to all of you before we start. And that is that no matter how many things I've done involving the LGBTQ+ community, no matter how many positions of leadership I've held, I'm still learning too. And so I hope that we'll be able to share tonight. I hope that you will ask questions or make comments, and I will learn from you as well. And you'll see as we go through this that what we're talking about, the use of language, how we talk to people, how we communicate with each other, is an ongoing evolution of learning and of sensitivity. So the first thing that we want to focus on is allyship. And allyship is a term that's really come to the forefront over the past several years. And we think more and more about it. It's the practice of emphasizing social justice, inclusion, and human rights by members of an in-group to advance the interests of an oppressed or marginalized out-group. So one of the things that I think I'd like everybody to focus on tonight is that sometimes you can be a member of an in-group and sometimes you are a member of an out-group. It really depends on where you are in life and what's going on in your world at any given moment. So I think all of us can use our experience of being a member of an in-group to monitor ourselves, to see how we talk to people, but also our experience of being an out-group to how we feel when people are not addressing us in ways that are respectful and maybe hurtful to us. So these are the big takeaways for this evening. Sexual orientation and gender identity are not the same things. Words matter. People define themselves, not the other way around. And everyone is entitled to their own identity. These are our big takeaways. So I think most of you know the basic letters: L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, transgender, and Q being used to represent the word queer or questioning. These are pretty basic. There are some other letters that we use in our alphabet. Intersex, and I'll talk about definitions in a moment. A may be asexual. Whoops, I'm sorry. My screen is bouncing. A may be asexual, aromantic, or an ally, or androgynous. GNC is not the name for our purposes of a vitamin store, but it refers to the term gender non-conforming. People may identify as non-binary, as pansexual, as polyamorous. So let's start with sexual orientation. That's going to encompass the first part of my talk this evening, and then we're going to move on to gender in the second half. But sexual orientation is a term describing a person's attraction to members of the same gender or to members of a different gender. Sexual orientation and gender identity, as I said, are different concepts. Sexual orientation is about who I form my intimate relationships with. Again, gay and lesbian terms I think we all know and understand. And we'll hit some of the terms that we may not see all the time. Questioning, that Q, a term used to describe a person who may be unsure and is questioning their sexual orientation. Remember, whether someone defines themselves as questioning or not is up to them. And of course, we know heterosexual and straight, and bisexual, meaning a term used to describe a man or a woman who is sexually and emotionally attracted or able to be attracted to both sexes. So here we get to some of our breakdown of some of these plus words. And I think the most important thing I want to focus on tonight, because you all have the slides and can go back and read these, but the word I want to focus on tonight is queer. And I want to tell you a story. One of the very first cases that I had as a lawyer involved a gay man who was getting a divorce from his wife. And he had come out during the marriage, and they had 2 children together. And I'm sitting in the judge's office with my adversary, and we were talking about my client having overnight visits with his children while this divorce process was going on. And my adversary, now remember, this is now 30 years ago, a little more than 30 years ago. My adversary says to the judge, "But judge, he's a queer." Now the judge quickly stopped the use of that language at the time. But the reason I tell this story is that my adversary was using the word queer in a pejorative manner. It might have been that my client might have described himself as queer, might have called himself queer to his friends or in other social contexts, but it was not the place of my adversary to use that term. Like any other pejorative terms that have been used about any marginalized group, sometimes these words are reclaimed by their community and may be used by them, but shouldn't be used by others without knowledge that that word is appropriate. Sorry about that. So again, some other terms to describe some of the plus in our language and in our LGBTQ plus community. A couple of things I wanted to point out. I've added some things to this presentation over the past over the past year or so, to reflect what LGBT communities of color will use language that's entirely strange to white people. And so you'll see I've added the terms in the life and WLW and MLM, women loving women, men loving men, terms that have really grown out of communities of color, particularly the African American community. So again, why are we here tonight? We're here to talk about language. And I always make a presumption when I am doing these presentations that the people who are listening understand what offensive language is. So to all of you listening, please don't take offense that I'm discussing offensive terms. One of the things that I wanted to share with you tonight, because you work with the public every single day, is how to listen to people's language and use of terms and try to grow sensitive to whether someone is using those terms in an offensive manner or in a manner where they just may not know that they're being offensive. So particularly with the word homosexual, it's not a word that's used very often anymore by gay or lesbian people because it has a clinical connotation. And we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it wasn't until the 1970s that the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association determined that being gay or lesbian was not a mental or emotional disorder. And so we're not really very far away in human terms from a time when gay and lesbian people were pathologized, where their attractions and their relationships were considered psychiatric disorders. So the term homosexual is generally used only now in direct quotes. And if someone uses the term, it may be that they're ignorant, that it may be offensive, or it may be that they're using it purposefully. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The other phrase that I suggest that people think about is sexual preference. The term preference means that there is a choice to be made. And that therefore, if you choose one direction, that's one direction you take. But if you can choose that one direction, you must also be able to choose not to take that direction. And so again, we want to begin to understand that language can be hurtful and can be dismissive of people's innate senses of themselves. And that sexual orientation is the accurate description of an individual's enduring physical, romantic, or emotional attraction to members of the same sex or the opposite sex. These are not choices or preferences that people make. A couple of other things that we want to think about is we want to avoid trying to label activities, emotions, or relationships in any way that might make us think that the person or the interactions that they have are illegal, are offensive, are in some ways to be denigrated. So when you see, and going back to what I said earlier, I want to help you be able to identify language that people may be using. If someone comes in and talks about the homosexual agenda, they probably have a negative impression of gay and lesbian people. And your radar should go up right away about what's going to come next. What's the discussion that's going to have to be had with that person if they decide that those are the terms that they want to use. Again, back to the discussion of preference. Lifestyle is another term that makes no sense when we're talking about people's sexual orientation. There is no single lesbian or gay or bisexual lifestyle. The quote at the bottom here, I like to go out to dinner on the weekends and vacation in London. Now that's a lifestyle. But a lifestyle also implies that there is a choice and that someone can be cured of that choice. So I can certainly restrain myself from going out to dinner on the weekends and choose another vacation destination. But that doesn't mean that I can change my sexual orientation. The words admitted and avowed also come in history, from knowing that for years and years, gay people, as I said, were not only pathologized, but there was something shameful to be hidden. It wasn't until the 1980s, finally, and Jean can maybe confirm my recollection of the timing, that gay people working for the federal government could actually get security clearances of the highest levels. There was a concern that someone could out them and therefore blackmail them. And so people being LGBT were placed into a box where they couldn't be trusted because maybe somebody else couldn't be trusted. So if we're going to talk about someone who is openly gay or lesbian or bisexual or simply out, you can use that term. Deb Guston is an out or an openly lesbian attorney from New Jersey. The term admitted, avowed, or other things that describe some type of behavior that is shameful or inherently secretive is something that we should avoid. So look, these are derogatory terms that we all know about. And when I'm talking to audiences with a lot of young people, I like to talk, I don't like to talk, but I do talk about the genesis of some of these terms, primarily of the term fag or faggot. And I try to remind people, it's always interesting to see people's faces when we talk about this, but I remind particularly young people that the reason why these terms are offensive and hurtful is because they refer to the sticks that were used in the Middle Ages that were lit on fire to burn gay men at the stake. And that's where we come to get that term. It is a horrible term. It is one that we avoid, obviously, and we want to make sure that if we're hearing it around the workplace or in our schools or our homes, that we're trying to correct people. And sometimes what it takes is telling people where these terms originate from. But that doesn't mean that people may not have adopted, as I said, a pejorative word to describe themselves. But these are not words that anyone who does not describe themselves in that manner should be using. Again, I talked about the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association. And so again, words like deviant, disordered, dysfunctional, all of these things. Again, I don't expect that anyone in this audience will have used any of these terms, but I do expect that some of you may have heard them in various settings to describe LGBT people. And then kind of the final group of things that we worry about are associating gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people with criminal activity, with pedophilia, child abuse, sexual abuse, any of these other criminal activities. And I think you see that a lot in what's happening now with attempts to keep particularly transgender people from accessing public spaces, particularly bathrooms. We'll talk about that in a minute. But again, we have to watch out that we are not saying, we're not allowing anybody else to intentionally connect an LGBT person with criminal activity. You know, it's this is one of the bases for the current undercurrent right now, and some of the overt things that are happening around the country in respect to new laws, new policies, new litigation. There we go. Okay, I'm going to take a pause, and I think Lisa is monitoring the chat and see if there's anybody with comments or questions on this segment on sexual orientation.
We've got a question, but for later in the discussion,
Okay.
which I believe is already, it's about book banning. So nothing about your current presentation.
Okay. I got some questions from some folks earlier on, and I think one of the first question was, how do we deal with challenges to programs and LGBTQ plus kids materials in a non-confrontational way? And again, this is why we're doing a program like this, right? To help people feel comfortable with words, feel comfortable with terminology. And I think just as Dave and as Tracy said, to continually remind the public that libraries are safe spaces. They are for everyone. And it's also, you know, it's one of those things that I always find where you see someone is talking very badly about a movie that may be somewhat controversial, or maybe I don't think it's controversial, but someone else does. And you always ask them then, well, have you seen the movie? And they invariably will say no. And then you just have to think about how much credence you give to someone who is criticizing something that they don't know anything about. So we can talk a little bit about policies, and I think that's something really that within the Buckle system, I think you'll be talking about. But again, kind of knowledge is a is a big shield to be able to be used with people who are perhaps being challenging about things that they don't know a lot about. Let's talk about gender identity. Again, different from sexual orientation. So transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity or gender expression differ from their assigned sex at birth. That's the sex that's listed on your birth certificate that everybody assumes you are. Now, not all transgender people want to live as the sex different from the one they were assigned at birth. There are individuals who cross-dress, who live androgynously, meaning that they either in their body type or in their dress do not conform to norms and that would indicate one gender or another. Or they don't live their life in a binary manner. They may refer to themselves as gender queer. These are all within the umbrella term of transgender. Many transgender people are mislabeled all the time. So I want to say this to everybody, and this is a mistake that many people make them, even if they are good-hearted and open-hearted. So the preferred use of the word transgender is as an adjective. It's not a noun and it's not a verb. So Tony is a transgender man, not Tony is a transgender or Tony is transgendered. If you hear yourself adding an ED to the end of the word transgender, stop yourself. Remember, we use it as an adjective to describe someone. It is not a state of being. It's not a noun. And it certainly is not a verb. So transgender man is a term for a transgender individual who was assigned female at birth and currently identifies as a man. Sometimes this is shortened to the term trans man. Likewise, transgender woman is a term for a transgender individual who was assigned male at birth and currently identifies as a woman. This is sometimes again shortened to the term trans woman. Now, cisgender, what is that? It's a word that we've kind of just started to use, and I wanted to go back and try to figure out kind of timing on it. And so while we know that the word transgender dates back to about the 1970s, the word cisgender is a child of the 1990s. And it is a term that is currently used to describe people who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And since you are all library professionals, I wanted to look at the dictionary. So I went to Merriam-Webster, and we kind of look at the derivative of this is that cis has been an adjective with an entirely different meaning since the late 19th century. It's characterized as having some cis was used to characterize something as having certain atoms or groups of atoms on the same side of a longitudinal axis. Now, I can read these words. I don't understand what that sentence is all about. But what we do know is that the term cis has been adopted to mean someone, because it has stood for on this side or on a certain side, that it has been used now to define people who identify on the same side as they were assigned at birth. Now, why did this come about? Why do we use the term cisgender? Probably, again, because sometimes people want to identify themselves. Just as we don't walk around saying, oh, that person over there is transgender. We don't walk around saying that person over there is cisgender. But when I walk into a room, if I'm working and I'm talking about myself, and we're dealing in this sphere of talking about gender identity and sexual orientation, I will identify myself as a cisgender woman who is lesbian. So that's an identity of my gender identity and my sexual orientation. So again, it gives people who identify with the gender assigned at birth a term to use for themselves. I'm going to move through some of this to a certain extent, but I want people to understand that some transgender people identify as being transgender without being diagnosed with a DSM-5 diagnosis called gender dysphoria. Some people's innate sense of their gender identity causes such a strong and persistent identification that they are discomfortable, they are so uncomfortable in their physical appearance and their physical body that it causes great disturbance psychologically. So some people can be diagnosed with with gender dysphoria, and some people are not. This kind of came for anyone who is interested in this area of just thought and science. This became a real big issue with the US military a couple of years ago when there was an attempt to ban transgender people from serving in the military. And there was a discussion about, could you discriminate against people if they actually had a diagnosis of gender dysphoria? And so it became a big differentiation between someone who had a diagnosis and people who did not. Now, some transgender people choose to undergo surgical treatments. Some choose to undergo hormonal therapy. Some don't. Again, being transgender is not based on what kind of treatment you may be receiving. It's based on your own innate sense of self. And sometimes that manifests itself with people who are seeking surgical procedures or hormonal therapy, and sometimes it doesn't. So again, words not to use. What is a language of an ally? The words on this screen: tranny, she-male, it. I recently had an unfortunate interaction with a lawyer, a former law professor, who actually used the term it when talking about transgender people. And I found it, I was just shocked. I'm still shocked, I think. So names, whenever possible, use a transgender person's chosen name, even if it's not their legal name. Oftentimes transgender people cannot afford a legal name change. They may not be old enough to change their name legally with the support of their parents. And they should be afforded the same respect for their chosen name as anybody else who lives by a nickname or some name other than that which is on their birth certificate. So again, we're going to use the name that people prefer to use. If it's not let's talk about pronouns now, because this is what everybody is so focused on. So first I'll give you my personal opinion. And that is that pronouns are probably the most useless words in the English language. We can do better, and we can appropriate our speech and adjust our speech to get rid of pronouns as much as possible. We just have to think about it a little. So if it's not possible to ask a person what pronoun they prefer, and you notice I just said they prefer rather than he or she, use the pronoun that's consistent with that person's appearance and gender expression. For example, if a person wears a dress and tells you their name is Susan, a feminine pronoun would be appropriate, unless they tell you no, don't use she, use they, or use he. And if we are corrected, what do? We apologize, move on, and make sure we remember what we've been asked to do. When describing transgender people, please use the correct term or terms to describe their gender identity. Again, going back, we want to use transgender woman or transgender man, or very frankly, just using woman or man, depending on who they have identified themselves to be. So back to the language of an ally. Again, sexual orientation is different from gender identity. A transgender man can be gay or straight or bisexual. Same thing for a transgender woman. Same thing for a cisgender man or a cisgender woman. Two different concepts, and one person may have two identities, which we may not necessarily off the bat associate with each other. So why do we talk about this? So using offensive language rarely gets you to the goals you want to achieve and can really irrevocably prejudice your reputation and your institution's reputation. People make honest mistakes, and if you do, apologize with grace and respect. We misgender people and animals all the time. We say, oh, what a cute little girl, but it turns out to be a boy. Oh, what a cute little girl, you know, when we could be saying, oh, what a cute little baby, or oh, what a cute little dog. We don't have to use gendered names and identifications all the time. We have to try to adjust our language. One of the questions was, you know, what do you do if you need to get someone's attention, where you might instinctively say, sir, or ma'am? Well, how about just hello or good morning to get someone's attention? Add the word friend. Figure out some other possibilities rather than using gendered terms, which may end up being wrong and thereby embarrassing you or embarrassing the person that you're speaking with. It's okay to use plurals. It may not sound right in your head, but you'll get used to it, I promise you. The style books are adapting to gender neutral use of pronouns and nouns. Saying they are a librarian is appropriate. You can do that. Like I said, it's going to take some work for us to adapt our language to using gender neutral or gender inclusive terms, but it can work. And just because it wasn't what we learned in English class in the 8th grade doesn't mean it's wrong. It's more important that we be inclusive and welcoming than it is that we try to, you know, please our long gone English teachers. In a business setting, ask someone how they wish to be addressed. Nothing wrong with it. If you have intake forms, and you all may want to go back to any of your library forms where people are signing up for their cards or signing up for programs, and see if there are any questions that are gendered that may exclude someone. But you can, if you need to ask what pronouns someone uses, we've got a list here. The ones that we typically identify in the English language, but there are other constructions that have been created over time by members of the transgender or the non-binary community. Not a lot of them have caught on, but many people do refer to themselves by alternate constructions. Be respectful, be open to it. Remember that people define themselves. If someone wishes to define themselves as queer, the proper discussion would be, they told me they were queer, not he is a queer. If a woman calls herself a dyke, that's her definition, but saying Jane is a dyke will likely be misunderstood that you have used a slur. Same thing with a gay man who may refer to himself as a fag. So I'll wrap up, we'll take a few questions, but in your resources, I pulled some URLs for some of the library associations that have a lot of great information. Also, there's an article here from an NPR article that I found very helpful. Got some other things from CNN and from Lambda Legal about preventing censorship in school libraries, which hopefully will be helpful to you. Guston is an organization of educators that has created the Rainbow Library. They have a list of all the books that they feel are basically required reading and should be available to people in libraries and at schools. And I've got this wonderful graphic that I thought would be nice for you to hang on to. So we'll take a little questions before we head on to Jean's presentation.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a, yes, we have a comment. Please don't be dramatic or go on too long with apologies. I agree, Julia, 100%. Just, like I said, apologize with grace, little humility, move on. What's important is your relationship with people. And if you do, as Julia has suggested, I think relationships can be really, really wonderful. Sandy says opposite sex assumes binary supremacy. I don't know whether, I agree with you. I don't know whether it assumes supremacy, but it certainly assumes that there is a binary. And that's one of the things that we really know. So thank you, Sandy. I'm gonna go back and look and see what I said. And yes, you know, and Elizabeth comments, the term opposite sex, well, other genders possibly, I mean, when we refer, we're starting to try to use the word different sex. Again, you guys are all right on, absolutely, in trying to figure out, you know, how to understand the reality of people's lives and put it into language, right? Okay, I see some questions. I got a direct question from someone. I don't know whether it's there because they wanted to be known or not, but I see good information and I will try to incorporate that into some future stuff. All right, we have a comment. What's our professional responsibility to correct the offensive speech of patrons in a protected space? This is going to be, I think, a big discussion that everybody's going to have within their own institutions and system-wide. I know it's certainly a discussion that I've had with people within the legal community. And I've had this discussion with several judges about where they feel their responsibility is if litigants or lawyers are using offensive speech. I think it's a matter, perhaps we go back to something that was commented on earlier, that correct requests, polite requests for corrective speech, for the not using certain terms in that public space, may be something that can be done, again, without making a huge deal of it. And if it's somebody who said something they really don't understand what they've said, they'll listen, they'll consider, and they'll move on. If it's somebody who's used offensive terms because they want to be offensive, that may be a point of conflict. So again, I think these are things that you may have to have some internal discussions, probably more than we can go into now. I have been part of some kind of role-playing activity, exercises to try to deal with this, and that might be a next step here. Okay, let's see. I think Sandy's question about some banned books, will come back to Jean on some of that. And there was a question, maybe Lisa, you can answer this, a question whether the recording will be made available to committees within the system. And I have a feeling that's fine. I'm going to be sending the recording link to everybody.
Okay. Yeah. But I would ask you if you were okay with it, so.
Oh, I'm okay with it. No problem with me. All right, I'm just going to look back at some of the questions before. There was a question of what's a good way to correct a coworker or a supervisor on LGBTQ plus issues. This person had an issue with something that a supervisor said while they were preparing a pride display. Again, look, the more comfortable you are with language, the easier it should be for you to say to somebody, hey, that really wasn't appropriate. Let's, maybe you should consider not using that term and using this term. We don't have to necessarily be aggressive in trying to correct people who are not intentionally using hurtful language. Think about, and again, I'm not trying to say that people who unknowingly use intentional language are childlike, but think about trying to correct a child. You don't yell at them, you don't scream at them, you take them aside and you say, that's not really appropriate. Let's think about using something different. I have always found that a gentle approach is the best way to make people rethink what they have said. You can't make people change their minds, but you can certainly ask them to think about what has been said.
Hey, Deb,
Yes.
can I jump in a little bit?
Oh,
too?
please, Jean. This is Jean.
Hi, everybody. I've had similar experiences, and I think, as Deb said earlier, we're still learning all of this. Like, things are evolving and changing. And I think acknowledging our own vulnerabilities here and saying, like, I'm not sure where things are, but like the way you said that sounded to me like it could be offensive to someone, right? If it's not directly impacting you. Just like, just kind of raising the question, like, that sounds like an ouch to me. So just wanted, I think there are gentle ways, like as Deb says, there are gentle ways to have these conversations and acknowledge our own learning around this. And so, I encourage folks to, start those conversations when they're comfortable. And even I think with patrons, there are ways to think about like acknowledging that they might not understand that their phrasing, could be viewed as offensive. So yeah, but I'm eager to learn from you all too, as we think about, how to address this more broadly.
And with that, thanks. My contact information is in your materials. Anybody feel free to email me privately, give me a call. Happy to continue this discussion with you. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Jean.
Thanks, Deb. And I appreciated that presentation so much because it kind of helps me think through all of the things I'm still learning. So, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. As some of you know, I'm pinch hitting for Frank Corrado, who is a mentor and a guru to me on First Amendment issues. And so I hope I can do this justice, but I haven't had time to provide slides, but I'm excited to be here with librarians of all people, because you are some of the people working the hardest to protect our freedoms, and so thank you for that. I also used to serve on the Essex County LGBTQ Advisory Board for several years, and so I'm really excited to see this partnership between Bergen County's committee and the library community. So I'm here to just talk to you a little bit about the First Amendment and about censorship, and just to say that ideas are really powerful, and you all know this, and that's why intellectual freedom is important, and that's why it's protected by the Constitution, and it's also why we see movements that are trying to force the government to suppress ideas. And so I come from the ACLU of New Jersey, and our organization is 60 years old, and the National ACLU has been around for more than 100 years. And during that time, we fought censorship in all of its forms and opposed it in all of its forms. And I'm proud to say a lot of that work has been in partnership with librarians. The American Library Association is a terrific resource, and I hope you all are connected to that. They're tracking book bans and challenges, and so it's a good place to kind of check and see what the trends are in around the country. Another important resource is the National Coalition Against Censorship. And many years ago, when I was a staff attorney, I worked with another county library system that was experiencing there was a campaign against an LGBTQ book for youth, and the NCAC was a really helpful resource. And they are a coalition against censorship, promoting freedom and inquiry, and they have services that involve facilitating dialogues in communities. And so just to say, like, that's another important resource. And then PEN America also is another anti-censorship, protecting expression in literature organization. And so if you're interested in these issues, I they track similar censorship trends around the country and around the world. So as you likely are experiencing, we are seeing coordinated campaigns, sometimes under the banner of parents' rights, to ban books from schools and public libraries. And as I think Sandy, someone in the chat noted earlier, a lot of that are focused on books that address race, LGBTQ issues, or other content around marginalized communities. And this, the first wave that I perceived of this was around critical race theory. And so critical race theory is something I learned in law school more than 20 years ago. And I didn't even take a class on it, but I knew it was there. And it's an academic theory that people are not learning in, K to 12 schools, or, it's not in, picture books. So, and what it is, though, is this important academic theory, and it focuses on systemic racism and how it's deeply ingrained in our society and how it shapes our worldviews. And what we've seen is that term's been co-opted by opponents as a term to broadly apply to discussions around race and racism, and even history of slavery and oppression of Black people and other people of color. So it's, it's become this catch-all to suppress ideas. And so what we've seen are legislatures trying to pass laws that are anti-CRT, and it's trickled into book banning, including some notable approaches, which, notable campaigns around books like the 1619 Project, for example, which is a history book and not a theory book. And so, but they're really trying to silence people and silence discussions and really prevent people from having information that's important to them. And so, and it, it denies people their rights to information that's accurate and full, and to debates that are happening in the world around them. So just to say, as I was trying to, look at resources to talk to you today, it's pretty grim out there, which is, I saw in Texas, there's one legislator that came up with this spreadsheet of 850 books, and he wrote to all of these school districts asking them to report on how many they have of each title and how much they've spent on these books. And it's wide-ranging content, right? It's not just CRT, it's not just LGBTQ, but it's about birth control, it's about history of slavery. You see these titles, and it's just it was really sobering and shocking to me to see the kind of coordinated attacks that are happening. In Pennsylvania, right next door, I saw that a school board had banned books by people, exclusively by people of color, including Jacqueline Woodson and Ibram X. Kendi, and titles about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. And so, just in our region, and I'm sure as you're going to be telling me, we're hearing from parents who are trying to shut down access to information. And so this is, of course, related to, pushes to ban books about LGBTQ content. And it's hard not for me. I'm actually working on another presentation for later this month on anti-trans laws across the country. And it's hard for me to not connect the dots on this, which is there are coordinated attacks going on against trans people, against LGBTQ people. I read just this weekend that the Texas GOP, Talk About Language, adopted a platform that states that homosexuality is an abnormal lifestyle choice. Those are all the words that Deb just told us not to use, right? And that's the official platform of the Texas State Republican Party. They also, oppose all efforts to validate transgender identity. So we see this happening, and this movement is moving into our public spaces, including the forefront of libraries. And we know that these targeted attacks on books are hurting marginalized communities, and it silences important voices, and it invalidates people's lived experiences, and it demeans groups of people. And so there's that harm. And then, it has a broader impact, which is removing them from shelves, deny students who would choose to read these books the autonomy and agency to decide and think for themselves. And we know that it doesn't erase the need for students to like need these materials and to, you know, see themselves reflected in books. So just kudos to all of you on the front line. Libraries are a public service and you are leading in these trenches, and your communities are counting on you to protect our shelves for everyone so that they can remain places that are free from government censorship. And, you know, when I was reviewing materials for tonight, I was looking at a blog post by a lawyer I know who represented parents in a lawsuit that challenged a book ban in Utah several years ago. And a parent was one of the plaintiffs in that case. And she was talking about how she respected the right of all parents to place limits on what their own children can read, but she doesn't think that other parents should be dictating what library materials are available for other people's children. And, you know, she said, our job as parents is to make sure we teach our children about our values, and we can do that without imposing our personal views on the rest of the school community. And so that really, I think, kind of gets at the heart of like, you're free to live your life, and like we have to let our neighbors live their own lives too. And so censorship is not an answer to how you want to live your life and raise your family. And so to get into the legal part of this, when the government decides that certain books shouldn't be allowed in a library based on the information they contain or the point of view they have, they're engaging in what's called content or viewpoint discrimination. And the First Amendment does not allow the government to do that. It doesn't, books or ideas should not be limited because they contain controversial, unpopular, or offensive content. And so, you know, so when you get rid of some books because of objections, you're, you know, favoring the opinions of a small group over the opinions of others. And the leading case in this, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about the First Amendment, but let me just do a little side departure here and tell you that the First Amendment is in our United States Constitution. And as a New Jersey attorney, I'm really proud, and I work on New Jersey civil rights and civil liberties and free expression, and I'm really proud of our New Jersey state constitution. And so since you're all librarians, I just, you know, it's a great resource for students and young people too, because the New Jersey state constitution protects individual rights more strongly than the federal constitution. The federal constitution is what we call a floor. It's not a ceiling, right? And so the New Jersey Constitution has language around free expression that is more broad than the First Amendment, and it's been interpreted more broadly to protect free speech. So I'm going to talk about in the federal context, but you should know that even if, you know, there's stuff going on in the Supreme Court, it's another topic. You know, even if there's a retrenchment on our rights at the federal level, the New Jersey Constitution is another resource for us that protects people and their right to access information and their right to read. And so we have that too. And thank you, Gladys, for putting that in the chat. And I'm always happy to talk about how the New Jersey Constitution is better than the federal. So you can invite me to the libraries to talk about that. So the leading case in this context is called Board of Education Island Trees Union Free School District number 26 versus PICO. And most people call it PICO. And in that case, the United States, and it's a 1982 case, the United States Supreme Court held that the right to read is an implied right in the First Amendment. And it ruled that the First Amendment does not permit the government from removing books that are already on library shelves based on the viewpoints that those books contain. And so the principles that are kind of set forth in PICO have been embraced by many courts across the country. Another court quoting that case said that a public library, like other enterprises operated by the state, may not be run in such a manner as to prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. And so as you heard from the name of the case, that was in the context of a school library, But in the context of public libraries, there's even, greater protections because it's a, you're serving the entire community. And so another federal court has said that the government cannot limit access to library materials solely on the basis of the content of those materials unless they can demonstrate that the restriction is necessary to achieve a compelling government interest and there are no less restrictive alternatives available. And so courts have explicitly found that protecting minors is not a valid or compelling government interest. And so so there's just a really strong court cases affirming that public libraries cannot be censored by the government. And so this also means that and I'm going to try to find the part, but essentially it means that the First Amendment also prohibits restrictions on materials, such as placing like disfavored books behind on a special shelf, or like where you have to make special requests to access them. So just to say that challenged materials shouldn't be treated any differently if they just because somebody has complained about them. And I'll just tell you that the ACLU's gotten involved in book bans in states across the country, like Utah and West Virginia. And like I mentioned earlier, many years ago, I got involved in another county's potential censorship case. And so I hope you will consider us a resource on these things. And I know one of the things you're thinking about is like how to protect yourselves. And what I would tell you all is process. In the PICO case, the Supreme Court had emphasized that the school board had not used an established, regular, and unbiased procedure for removing the books. And so I think to the extent you're thinking about how to diffuse and respond to people who are requesting that books be taken off the shelves, I think, thinking about your process for how books end up on the shelves and what it means to like how you handle requests to remove books from the shelves, putting in place a process for that and a review. In the PICO case, the Supreme Court also talked about that the procedures did not include or ignored the advice of literacy experts and librarians and teachers, and listed all of these professionals who should be consulted in the decision making. So that's another resource you should think about as far as like having a process in place. And so I guess I'll leave you on that note or start looking at the chat on this. But just to say that there's a lot of protection for preventing books from being taken off the shelves. And I hope, I'd love to brainstorm with you all and be a support and resource to you as you're confronting these potential campaigns and as they're hitting your doors. So I guess I'm just trying to see, it looks like there's been a bunch of questions.
There's been some. One of the early questions, which you wouldn't actually have the answer to this, but was, does Buckles have an official statement against book banning, which individual libraries can turn to for support in publishing their own statement? Adele or Dave, is that something Buckles would do?
So, Adele, if you want to, you can take it first.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead.
So Buckles itself doesn't provide sort of a blanket protection for what is on the shelf at your local library. That really comes down to your collection development policy. Every library should have one. I believe all of the Buckles libraries has a collection development policy. And within that policy is just what was described. It has a challenge procedure. It has the reasons that you collect material, right? And so when we talk to folks, now Buckles does have a shared e-content collection that we actually do have a collection development policy. We have a challenge policy on it as well, because anytime you collect material, you can get challenges. A great resource for, I second ALA being an amazing thing. Almost every library board, I think, to date has adopted freedom to read, freedom to view, which is a really great start to really thinking about how you're protecting everybody in your community just with what has been described, the ability to get access to ideas. And I think those are the key tools here. That's why Buckles itself would not have anything particularly for your printed collection. There are a ton of really good collection development policies. Adele has one at Fairlawn. You can talk maybe a little bit about what you do at Fairlawn.
Which we are very, we made sure to strengthen our policy so that challenges when presented are presented. We ask a lot of questions like, are you a member of the community? Have you actually read the book? What specific passage are you objecting to? And we have problems, you know, I shouldn't say this because I'm inviting trouble, but we haven't had a challenge. So hopefully it will hold up. But I don't think that there would be any reason why it wouldn't be. We are very careful with collection development, but we also have a very broad collection and we try to make sure to have something for everyone. If anybody wants a copy of the different policies that are out there, I would say getting them together. I know Mimi Hoy had done a presentation at NJLA a few years ago on the 10 policies that every library should have and how to update them. And if she still has the handouts from that, that would be a good starting point for collection development policies.
Thank you.
So there was a discussion in the chat about a particular graphic novel that I'm familiar with. And I think these are constructive discussions, right? About not to ban a book, but where does it go? Where is an appropriate place for it to be if it is helpful to a segment of the community? And so I think that may be again, one of the things to think about is looking at, you know, so this is a book called Genderqueer. It's a memoir. It's a graphic novel. Looks like its publication date is May of 2019. So it's been around for a few years. So the discussion in the chat was really good about where does it belong? Not should we get rid of it? And I'm really encouraged by that. So thank you.
I think one of the important distinctions being made in the chat too is, no, it's not, some of the content in the book isn't appropriate for children. And that's why it should be shelved in the adult collection. It's sometimes it's as simple as that where you put it in the library, it makes a big difference.
Have there been any challenges in the library system recently?
We've had a few libraries that had it. We actually received a call for action at the Buckles office. We had a long conversation with the person. And, you know, they suggested that we should have a list of books to be reviewed at the system council for everybody to go over. We had a very interesting conversation. You know, I had this very passionate person. We said, well, okay, so if we start letting people bring any books they want to talk about at the system council, just how long do you think that meeting is going to be? And we talked a little bit about that, and she kind of came to the idea that it might be a very, very long meeting that we would be having if we had to talk about every book that somebody might not want in a library, and maybe some of the books that she might want to see in a library may not be in a library either. Again, it wasn't a collection piece. It was more, they wanted to do it. It's around, I think, in all honesty, school libraries are probably facing a more dire piece than what we're facing in public libraries. I think part of what was talked about is that public libraries enjoy, a really special place in the marketplace of ideas. We have a lot of protections, and I can't tell you enough to use those protections to the benefit of your folks, because not everybody is going to stand up for those folks. And it is one of the great things about being a public library is, I mean, you heard case law, for Pete's sakes. I think the courts have generally, and Dee, maybe you can talk a little about this, have been pretty good about saying librarians have a great deal of professional judgment here and we should trust them. I mean, there's a great deal of court precedent, both at state and local levels, to say librarians are good at this. We should trust them.
That's right. I mean, when I was preparing, like the cases, especially when I was looking at ACLU cases, a lot of them get settled quickly because, sometimes a letter will just get people thinking or talking to a lawyer and saying like, oh yeah, we shouldn't do this. So just to say, the law's on your side on this, and I think I put a link in the chat to the ALA, but they have resources to help you guide your policy thinking. And also it looks like even responding to people, to informal, expressions of concern and things like that. So I hope that can be useful for you as you're thinking through what you might need to equip yourselves and your colleagues.
This is Lisa. I have a question, just slightly off topic from book banning though. What can you tell us about handling challenges to events like Drag Queen Storytime? Because it's usually the same people and it's the same, but it's a slightly different approach to it. And it's usually from the vein that the library shouldn't be hosting events like this.
Deb actually told me to focus on, or to like look at this, and I didn't do some deep, I forgot. So I don't know for sure if there've been legal challenges to that. I think a lot of that's happened informally. And so I would just, I think part of it's deflecting or asking them to submit their comments, to an email address or, and running it through the chain and process, but just like saying we take feedback on all of our programs and happy to, hear your concerns. And I think let them bring it to your board, but I guess I would suggest, or, try to avoid that happening, obviously, but I guess I would just suggest that they have the right to express their concerns and you can do with them as you please. I think I would hope that the appropriate response is not to shut down programming. And so I guess if you have particular complaints about that, please reach out to me offline and I'll do a little digging, but I would just encourage you to kind of take that feedback like you would feedback about things on your shelves.
Yeah, and I think, I think it was through you folks that I heard that Hackensack had a story hour that they were not widely publicizing because they were concerned, but they held the event. And Adele, I don't know if you saw this, but I saw this morning that there's going to be a drag queen story hour on Sunday at Fairlawn's Pride.
Yeah, we're working.
That kind of generated a bunch of apparently some concerning letters to the town council. I'll be there, so I'll watch out for you, everybody. But I think I agree that this is going to be a focal point. As Jean said, that a lot of transgender issues are kind of coalescing as being the place that people, want to stake their flag to talk about what they, whatever their concerns are. And it's always a convenient target, to pick on the smallest group of people and perhaps some of the most vulnerable. So we should expect it. And I agree, Jean. I think deflection is the first thing you want to do. Try to strategize about a way to take that complaint, especially if it's, to somebody at your front desk and deflect it, move it to somebody else, move it to somebody else, and hopefully some of these things just dissipate. And if not, you pick up the phone and call Jean.
I just wanted to add, Deb, we did host the Drag Queen Story Hour on Saturday. I forgot what time it is. We only received an email that was a complaint, but then again, it didn't require a reply, so we didn't reply to it. It was just informing us that that person felt a certain way about the story time happening. However, as you mentioned, a lot of it centered around their interpretation of the language of drag queen without paying attention to story hour. So it wasn't anything. So that was more, the onus was on them for misinterpreting the event. But you know, not every email requires a reply. They aired out their grievance. They didn't seem to require a reply. We held the event. It went wonderfully well. Everyone had fun and it was a great event.
Great.
And I would say, you know, if things become increasingly heated around those kinds of things, like if you're documenting what kinds of programs you have and how many people attend and the kind of feedback you get, I would, maybe I'm assuming, but I would assume that those kinds of events are popular and get good feedback and are well attended and have like people of all ages. And so hopefully, you know, you can put that on par with the other kinds of programming you're having and how it's, you know, well received by different segments of the communities you're serving. So, you know, I would think about it in the context of the broader services you're providing to say, you know, we provide a wide range and this fits into one slot and, you know, and these are the other kinds of things we do to serve the varying needs of our communities.
I can just jump back to another question that we got ahead of time. And this is where I'm learning too. I've liked to tell organizations that I speak to all the time that they really should, in order to let people who are either non-binary or gender non-conforming or use different pronouns or whomever they are, to let people know that they're welcome in this space. One of the things we can do is identify ourselves by our own pronouns. There was a comment, which I do take to heart, and I'm going to think more about it as to the recommendations that I give to people, is that some people may not be ready in their own lives to declare what their pronouns are. They may be examining and they may be in process, and requiring someone, particularly in a workplace, to declare one's pronouns may be harmful to an employee. So again, I think it's something that we can do to, if we can and we want to, we can use our pronouns. It's a way of saying, I understand that somebody's pronouns may be different from mine or may be different from my expectations. So you can talk to me and you can feel free to share your pronouns, which sharing pronouns means sharing identity. But I do take that to heart, and I think that no workplace should require that. I think it should be certainly something that's encouraged if people are in the space to do that.
So we do have some questions that were asked before the event. So I'm going to read some of them. I think we did answer some of them, but just to touch on the questions that were asked. So the first one was, how do we deal with challenges to programs? As we mentioned, someone said Drag Queen Story Hour and LGBTQ plus kids materials in a non-confrontational way. Is there a generic speech we can use that references our First Amendment and other rights? Are there specific recommended policies the library should have in place beforehand? And we sort of addressed that throughout the conversation. I don't know if there was anything that you guys wanted to add to that question.
No, I don't know. I think we pretty much covered a lot of that. Again, I think these are just like everything else. These are continuing conversations. We're all growing, right? We're all learning how to adapt to our desires in any professional setting, and particularly in the public space, to being inclusive. And that's going to mean a lot of different things tomorrow, and it's going to mean even more different things a year from now. So I think we just have to be open to the fact that we're all going to have to be adaptable and learn as we go around. We're all in this together. Yeah.
In that particular question too, I just wanted to note that it talks about a generic speech referencing our First Amendment and other rights. And I guess I would just say, as someone who works in the law, I think sometimes leaning on your rights can seem a little confrontational. And so I'd really suggest that your staff's workshop what they think would, and maybe it's based on policies you have in place, or ALA statement, if you are have adopted values and a mission about the right to read, the freedom to read and access information. I think using those as a starting place to talk about the library's values can be a good first approach to someone who might be questioning your decisions on content.
Someone also did ask, when the board is all white men, how do you advocate for others effectively?
Oh gosh, you try not, my apologies, Dave, but you try not to do that. Look, no matter, we've all been in circumstances where we may be the only other in the room. I think within whatever our systems are, we have to be mindful that the only way we get to a welcoming workplace, a welcoming public space, is if the people who are running it represent what that community looks like. It's a struggle. I think I can be open about this too. I've served on the ACLU board for a very long time. And there have been times when we have all been a bunch of white people. We've had some other diversity within that group, but it hasn't always been easy to have an organization. It's never easy to have an organization really reflect your community. And, as Tracy talks about a lot, and, Bergen County is one of the most densely populated counties in our state and one of the most diverse. So we have a lot to draw on. We just don't always achieve those goals. So we just have to be mindful that, if we do have a board, or if that's overrepresented by one type of person, we have to hope at least those folks are working towards diversity. It's just that, again, these are another set of evolutionary goals that we all have, to be in a space where we can have diverse boards, diverse leadership, diverse workforces, without, of course, turning anybody into a token where they're just not, where they're there just for show. Tracy has her hand up too.
I just wanted to add, I think the spot to start is lobbying your council to make sure that your board is more representative. And that may take a while, and it may take, I see Sandy shaking her head vigorously. But I know that may take a while, but the bottom line is, especially as our libraries seek to be safe spaces for all, to have your library board be reflective of your community as in its entirety is important and should be conveyed to your council emphatically.
And I'd add to that, educating your board, who, assuming you have the board you have currently, I think educating them about who their community is, right? Who Bergen County is, who their particular, what particular community you're in, and who you're serving, and reminding them about their response, like maybe not directly, but like kind of as a way to remind them who they're serving and whose needs they need to be prioritizing in their decision making. Can be a valuable way to, because I've also been on boards that have not necessarily reflected the diversity of who our community was. And I think it's important to kind of bring that knowledge to the fore.
And then I have a comment that was made. We shared Dev slides before the meeting today. So this is just a comment that was submitted. It said, "Thank you for letting me know all the names that are offensive to the LGBTQ community. It was informative and helpful. However, did it ever occur to anyone that cisgender is a word offensive to those who do not belong to the LGBT community? Let's get away from labels and appreciate each other for who we are and not what type of sex we engage in. Are we not more than that?" And I know Deb talked about it a little bit before, but just to sort of wrap it up and
Yeah, so first of all, I agree. I would love to live in a world where we don't have to talk about these things, where if I say, I'd like to introduce you to my wife, that nobody blinks an eye and everybody says, what's her name? But we don't. We don't live in that world yet. In some of our communities, we do. In some of our, but these are smaller communities. So I certainly don't suggest by the presentation that I gave tonight that we should all go walking around, looking around the corner to say, oh, is that a transgender person over there? Or is that a lesbian over there? This is not about that. It's about when we're engaging with people, how we address them, what we find out about them, what they are willing to share about themselves. I also just want to point out from the question, just a gentle reminder that the term cisgender deals with gender identity, not with sexual orientation. So again, we want to try to, we do want to make sure that we're trying to put things in the right categories here when we're talking about language. As I said, I think the term cisgender is one that, as I indicated in the materials, is a relatively new one, and it just kind of really sprung up when we began to talk more and engage in more conversation about gender identity. I apologize if it's offensive to anyone. It's really a technical term, as I said, that's been used to kind of designate someone other than a transgender person. And if you think about it, I think the real issue is most people don't wake up in the morning or wake up some morning questioning their gender identity. They know who they are. We know that transgender people from very, very young ages know who they are. And so when we're talking about terminology and everything, it's really, again, I'd love to live in a world where it doesn't matter, but we do.
And I just say that I use cisgender when I need to, in my advocacy work, when we're talking about advocating on behalf of trans women, for example, and talking about trans women and cis women as a unit, right? Like I can't say trans women and women because that doesn't make sense, right? Trans women are women, but sometimes you want to be able to distinguish and talk about the needs of different, elements of women. And so it's a really important way to, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to identify as a cisgender person, but it's an important tool to have when we're talking to try to meet the needs of everyone in our communities.
there was just one quick question that popped up in the chat. And it just, they were talking about library board members. I can't answer that because I don't know. But Laura and then Mary Ellen, we're talking about dual township committees / mayors select library board members. I've heard some towns narrow them down to 3 and present the 3 to the library board for their opinion as well. And that was, I guess, maybe in conjunction with Laura's comment about library board members are chosen by township committee members and have specific terms, so the library attorney cannot get rid of them. So I don't know if anyone wanted to address that really quickly.
I think, not to throw them under the bus again, but that's an Adele or Dave question, but I do believe that it's just every library, every town does things just a little differently, but there's probably, yeah, at most there's probably some minor regulations preventing certain things, but I that's all I know.
Adele, okay, so library boards are by law, there's a couple of positions that they have to be on. Adele, make sure I get this right, because I was from Kansas City. So I've not had a New Jersey. So The school superintendent's on the board, or their designate, and there is usually a designate from the mayor's office, and everybody else is appointed by the mayor. So it's not an elected position, it's an appointed position. There are term limits, but there are rules around being on the board, and if you're not active and all those kinds of different things. It is an appointed position. Now, that being said, they do have powers. You know, a library board is not just a it's not just a rubber stamp organization. Library boards are a recognized entity, and they oftentimes don't perhaps flex as much muscle as they can, owing to whatever relationship they might have with different people in the town. And that's probably a whole nother conversation you might want to have. Just remember, boards are appointed, but they do have powers, and they're not just there to do the bidding of a mayor. When they take on the role of being on the board, you know, which is being part of the public library, they take on everything about that public library, right? All of the things that we're supposed to be doing as a public library, a library board is supposed to do as well. So I hope that's, if I missed anything, please tell me. And it's, by the way, it's not unusual for library boards to be appointed and not elected. It's actually quite, it's weird. It's more rare for a library board to be elected than appointed.
Okay, so we're a little after 8:32, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Just everyone involved, this wouldn't have happened. Thank you all. I want to remind everyone that there will be an event evaluation being sent out, so please, please, please respond. And that trustees will get continuing ed credits within the next coming weeks. So we need some time for that. But thank you again all. Thank you for the insightful and thoughtful conversation. We will probably send out a follow-up email with some information from today's recording. So thank you again for everyone for coming.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.